March 1919, Russian Civil War. In the aftermath of the collapse of the Central Powers, the Red Army was advancing on all fronts and had captured large territories. But it had overstretched its forces, giving the Whites the opportunity to strike back. In the west, the Red Army was fighting against the newly formed states, while in north, east and south, the Reds were opposed by the White forces, who were fighting to overthrow the Reds' government. On the eastern front, the Whites prepared to go on the offensive. Both sides had around over 100,000 troops, and the Whites did not have an overall strong numerical advantage over the Red forces, but on the central part of the front, their forces outnumbered the Red troops 4-1. This allowed the Whites to launch a major attack against the Reds. The Whites' offensive began early in March. In the north, they outflanked the Reds' units and forced them to pull back. In the south, the Whites moved into the flank of the advancing Red forces in the mountains. But eventually the Reds pulled back their forces and repelled the Whites' attack. This stopped the Whites' advance in the south. At the same time, the Whites' offensive in the center was continuing. They made large territorial gains and approached the Volga River. Their advance in the center also aided the White forces in the north, forcing the Red forces in that area to retreat. By late April, the Whites had made large gains. The Whites' offensive in the east caused the Reds to send all of their reinforcements to that region, and the advancing Red forces in the south were cut off from additional troops. In the beginning of March, the Reds had around 100,000 troops against 45,000 Whites. But the White forces were of higher quality, and with the troops they had at hand, the Reds struggled to defeat the White forces. In the east, the Whites stopped the Reds' offensive on the Manech River line. In the west, the Whites defended effectively in the dense rail network of the Donbas industrial area. With the Reds' offensive slowed down, an uprising of the White Cossacks erupted behind the Reds' lines. By early May, the balance of power on the southern front was shifting towards the White forces. In Ukraine, the Red Army had to struggle without reinforcements. In the south, the Entente forces left without much resistance, and the lack of reinforcements did not cause problems for the Reds. But it made the campaign against the Ukrainian People's Republic more difficult. In March, the Ukrainian People's Republic, or UPR, had 32,000 troops against 47,000 Reds. The UPR forces offered stronger resistance to the Red Army. The Red Army attempted to cut the UPR territory into two, but it was hit by a counterattack. Eventually, the Red Army was able to gain the upper hand and isolate the UPR forces in the south from the rest of their army. The Reds forced them to retreat into Romania and disband. The Red Army gained an advantage over the remaining UPR forces. It outflanked the UPR troops in the north and forced them to retreat. But the Red Army lacked the strength to continue the offensive, and by early May, its advance on the southwestern part of the front came to an end. At that time, the communists had taken power in Hungary, but their power over the country was brittle, and Hungary was opposed by its neighbors, Yugoslavia, but mainly by Romania and Czechoslovakia. Communist Hungary could not survive without external help from the Red Army. But with no reinforcements, the Red Army was too weak to attack through the Western Ukrainian People's Republic. In late April, Romania and Czechoslovakia attacked Hungary and put even greater distance between the Red Russian and Hungarian forces, making them linking up even more difficult. In the northwest, the Red Army had 75,000 troops against 46,000 of its opponents in early March. The Reds were fighting well-supplied and capable forces of the nation-states. The Red Army offensive had already been stopped in this region, and with their reinforcements cut off, the Reds began losing ground to local forces. In mid-March, the German Expeditionary Force went on the offensive and occupied some territory west of Riga. In April, Polish forces attacked. They captured the city of Vilnius and the surrounding territory. In late April, there was a turning point of the Whites' offensive in the east. The Reds had previously stopped the Whites on the southern part of the front. Without the southern force protecting the flank of their central offensive, a large gap appeared in their advancing forces. The Red Army attacked into this gap, and the White forces suffered heavy losses. They had to fall back and begin defensive operations against the Red Army. But the losses they had suffered were too heavy, and with the Red Army reinforcements, the Reds now gained the upper hand on the whole front. The Whites retreated to a more favorable defensive line on the Belaya River. The Whites' force in the north was in a better position, but it expanded its strength in insignificant counterattacks, and the Red Army retained its advantage on the eastern front. At the same time, the Red Army was running into larger and larger problems on other fronts. On the southern front, by the middle of May, the Reds were having trouble. The initiative had passed to the White forces. The Reds' troops had dropped to 73,000 soldiers against 50,000 Whites. Having the Cossacks fight for them gave the Whites strong cavalry forces, and this allowed them to outmaneuver the Reds' formations. In mid-May, a Red force attempted to cross the Manech River when it was hit by the Whites' cavalry and was outflanked. The Reds were then pursued by the White Cossacks and suffered heavy losses. They retreated to Tsaritsyn. In the center, the White cavalry broke through the Reds' lines and linked up with the Cossacks' uprising. In the west, the Whites' cavalry scattered the Red Army's attacking force and then outflanked their position, forcing the Red Army troops into a retreat. At the same time, the Red Army was running into increasing problems in Ukraine. A large-scale peasant uprising against the Reds shook these territories. Although the Red Army was able to regain control of the largest towns, the region became a site of growing insurgency. The Reds could only afford a weak attempt to help communist Hungary. The Red Army's forces on Romania's eastern border distracted Romanian forces, which allowed Hungary to attack Czechoslovakia. The Hungarian forces advanced east and occupied part of the corridor to link up with the Red Army through the Western Ukrainian People's Republic. However, at that time, Poland began an offensive against the Ukrainian states. In mid-May, Poland had 50,000 troops against 66,000 Ukrainian soldiers. By that time, the Ukrainian forces had been unable to replenish their military supplies for a long time and had become weak. The Polish troops overran the UPR forces in the north and made contact with the Red Army. They also attacked and defeated the Western Ukrainian formations. The Ukrainian forces were now pushed to the east by the Polish forces. In a desperate situation, the Ukrainian units launched a counterattack, but it was defeated by the Poles and they occupied all of the territory of the Western Ukrainian People's Republic. The Ukrainian forces retreated eastwards. The occupation of the Western Ukrainian territory by Poland put a complete end to the hopes of the Red Army linking up with Hungarian communists. The Reds could not aid them, and some months later, the communist government in Hungary was deposed by Romanian forces. With the Red Army forces doing worse on other fronts, the Whites also went on the offensive in the northwest. They had organized a small force in Estonia. In mid-May, it attacked the defending Reds. It overran their forces and advanced towards Petrograd. The Red Army had to withdraw units from other parts of the front to protect the city, and the German expeditionary forces and the Estonian army made use of it and cleared the Red forces from the center of the front. Following that, the Estonian and the German expeditionary forces entered into conflict, which ended in the victory of the Estonian and Latvian forces. With the Red Army distracted by the Whites, Poland redeployed its troops to put pressure on Germany. These events contributed to Germany giving in to the Entente and signing the Treaty of Versailles, which further strengthened the positions of the nations in this region. With the Reds suffering from the Whites' offensives in the south and the northwest, they had to decide whether to continue the offensive on the eastern front and attempt to cross the Urals, or to stop the offensive and reinforce the other fronts. The White forces in the east were disintegrating under the weight of the defeats, and they were suffering from mass desertion. The Red Army decided to make use of that and cross the Urals. On the northern part of the front, the number of White soldiers was quickly decreasing. From their original number of 56,000 troops during the retreat, their forces dropped to 30,000 and they continued to disintegrate. They attempted to make a stand in the Ural Mountains, but their forces had become so few that the Red Army was able to bypass their positions. This made the Whites abandon their defenses in the Urals. In the center, the Red Army overcame the Whites' defenses on the Belaya River and then outflanked their positions in the mountains. The Whites attempted to make a stand on the highest part of the mountains, but due to the disintegration of their forces, they did not succeed, and by mid-July, the Reds had crossed the Urals in the center. With the loss of the Ural Mountains' defensive line and the White forces disintegrating, they could do little to stop the Red Army's advance, and the Red Army began to redeploy more reinforcements to other fronts. Meanwhile, the lack of reinforcements on the southern front devastated the Red Army's defenses. The Whites stormed Tsaritsyn and captured the city. Further north, the Reds withdrew to defensive positions covering the key rail lines. In the west, the Reds retreated and kept their main forces blocking the rail lines leading north to Moscow. This left the lands in the west weakly defended, and the Whites advanced west and occupied large territories. With the Red Army in disarray, the Whites hoped to continue the advance towards the key territories and completely defeat the Reds. They planned to advance towards Moscow with the goal to end the civil war. We will cover it in the next episode. And thanks to the patrons supporting the channel. Perhaps with people like Omega UMP, Brian Lindsley and Federico Peirani, we will see the Whites reach Moscow in the upcoming episode. Or maybe not. See you in the next video.